Hey guys, it's Ryan Sessions, and right now we're going to be doing our Webpack configuration. So hooray, we're going to almost be building our application. However, that part will be next video. Right now we're just going to be setting up Webpack. Before we get started there, what I'm going to show you is I did some cleaning up on my app module for my other project. You guys really didn't need to see a whole bunch of components I already had built and so on and so forth. So here you are. If you want to pause the video here and type this out into Notepad and save it as a template, this is kind of a template that I use for a module. So we have our imports up here, we have our routes, then we have our module declaration, and then we have our class. So alright, on to the Webpack. So what we need to do now is we need to add a Webpack configuration file. So we'll go here, add new item, and we're going to be looking for the template for Webpack. And I'm wondering, might have to go do some digging here for it. It's not the web configuration file, this is specifically Webpack. So alright, cool. So if you click down here on web, it's a Webpack configuration file. I'm not sure if this gets installed along with your Webpack task runner or if this is in Visual Studio by default. So I really suggest that you guys look at Visual or the video one and go and install that Webpack task runner, because it's really going to help you. So here we go, webpack.config.js. We're going to add that. Now what some people do is they create multiple versions of webpack.config.js. They do a development version, a production version, so on and so forth. Our settings aren't really going to change that much between development and production, and since this is just a tutorial anyways, I'm just going to have one webpack.config.js. So you see by default our template says that we have a use-strict declaration. I typically don't use this. I guess you guys could keep that in. I'm not sure if it's going to cause issues down the road, but you know, who adheres to standards these days, right? So the main part of the webpack.config is going to be your module.exports JavaScript object. It's going to have an entry point that defines where to go into your application to look for dependencies. It's going to have an output for where to submit all your bundled and compiled files into. It's going to have a dev server set up, which we're not going to be using because we don't have that dependency in our package.json. If you guys want to see how that gets set up, drop a comment in the comments below, and I'll make another video for that. But right now, I don't use the dev server. What I usually do is just use the watch functionality. And then we have our module, and what this does is it defines a list of loaders to tell us how to load things into our Webpack modules. So if I come over here and reference my current Webpack .config, at the top I have a couple of constants that I like to declare that helps me write my Webpack config, because this is a JavaScript file. It gets executed at runtime, so you can do any JavaScript logical functions you want in here. So I'm going to create a couple constants. What this is doing is it's using required.js to pull in the dependency called path and Webpack and set those as the path and Webpack constants. Same thing for our plugins, and same thing for our folder structures. So that way, if we change our folder structures, we can just change our constants here and we don't have to go hunt and search for them inside of our Webpack config. So our client app is the folder that has all of our application code. Our source is going to be the __ dir name, which should be the current directory, plus our application folder name. So that's going to tell us to go in from this project down into client app, and that's how we get to our application source. Same thing for the www root. We go to the current directory, which is our project, come down www root, and that's where we're going to be deploying our application code. Our node modules, that's where our third party is. By default, you don't see it in Visual Studio. If you want to see this folder, click on your project and come up here where these multiple files are. If you hover over it, it says show all files. You can click that and you'll see our node modules. So we do need a reference to that because we will be pulling things out of there and bundling it in with our application because they're needed. For our entry point, we have two of them. I wasn't very good at explaining this earlier, and it might not make sense right now, but we have our vendors.ts and our startup.ts. These are two different entry points, so Webpack will go into each one of these files individually, and it will look for any import statements, find those dependencies, bundle them together, go into those dependencies, look for further import statements so it's kind of like traversing the tree from the top node down into its leaf nodes until there's no more dependencies. It will then bundle everything in that tree all together into one bundle. So it's going to do this once for vendors, and it's going to do this once for application. So what happens is it's going to have a lot of duplication across the vendors and application because there's a lot of vendor code that we're actually using in the application. So as we get down into our plugins, I'll show you that we're going to use a plugin that pulls out that common functionality and pulls it into a third bundle, and then that vendors bundle is actually not going to be used. It's just kind of like masking things. It's kind of used as a filter to decide what gets pulled out of the application into a common bundle so that we're not loading everything all at the first time the application starts up. So the biggest takeaway is just this traverses the tree. So you don't have to have, you should not have very many entry points. You should only have 1 to 3 entry points. Each entry point is going to be the top level node of a tree, and it will go down through the dependencies of dependencies infinitely until there's no more dependencies and bundle them all together. So for our output, we have a couple properties in here that we need to put. We have the path to deploy. That's our application destination. It's going to be our www root. We have the file name convention we want to use, and what we're going to use for the file name convention is we're going to keep the application folder name / the name of the file .bundle.js. So what that means is we have a file named app.module.ts. If this was going to get loaded directly into the www root, which this is a terrible example because it's not going to, but if it were, it will keep the folder structure in the www root. So it's going to have www root / app.module.ts .bundle.js. You'll see how this makes sense later. The chunk file name, this is for chunking bundles. Really what this comes down to is that we're not doing just one big bundle, we're doing several small bundles, and so this helps us determine the chunk name with one of our other plugins that's going to help us do that. The public path, we just keep it as /. I think it's the default public path anyways, but that means everything's going to be in the www root itself. It's not going to be in some subfolder. Anyways, I hope that makes sense. I know it's confusing. Just trust me, this works. If you guys start tinkering with this stuff and start doing some looking on Webpack's documentation and stuff, some of this stuff will make a little bit more sense. For instance, file name and chunk file name aren't both used at the same time. They're used for different purposes. So there's a setting in here that it's actually missing by default, and that's resolve. What this does is this tells us, remember in app module ts or startup.ts, we're including this app.module, but we don't have a .ts on the end, and I told you I'd explain that later. Well, that's what the resolve does. What it does is it says whenever we have a statement such as import app module from, and it has this relative path, it says where do I look for this? The first place it's going to look for it is in our application source. So if it finds it within our application source folder, it's going to use that. If it doesn't find it in the application source folder, it's going to go into our node modules folder and start traversing that file path and try and look for it there. When it does find a file with the same name, if it doesn't have an extension on it, it's going to use these extensions by default. So since we did not say app.module.ts, it's going to try to look for app.module.ts. If that doesn't exist in that folder, it's going to look for app.module.js, app.module.json, app.module.css, so on and so forth until it gets to the very end. If it gets to the very end, it's just going to pull it anyways. It just doesn't know what the file extension is. So it's still going to bundle everything in there. So that's a really important setting to have in your Webpack. Plugins and module. So module is going to configure your loaders. Plugins are going to configure your plugins. In an earlier video I explained that the difference is that plugins have access to all of your files and modules only have access to files based on their file path and your regular expression that you put in there. So first what we're using is we're going to be using the webpack.optimize.uglify.json or JavaScript plugin. What this Uglify is it's minifying. I don't know why they call it Uglify these days. Everybody has to create a new term for things, but anyways, this is what takes our JavaScript and it compresses it by taking out the white spaces and so on and so forth. This is where we're using that HTML Webpack plugin when I explained to you in the package.json that we're using this to generate an HTML file that automatically has the script tags in it that include all of our dependent JavaScript and CSS files and so on and so forth. This is the plugin that does that. So we define a template. It's going to be index.html.tmpl. So we'll put that at the root of our project when we start building the app in the next video. What we want to do is we want to exclude chunks from our vendors. So up here we have two chunks, vendors and application. We only want to put the script tag in this HTML file for application. We don't actually want to include vendors because the only vendors that we use in the application are going to be pulled out into a third chunk called common anyways. So we don't need to include vendors. It's just used there for a filter process. We do want to minify this index.html. What we want to do is we want to collapse white space. We want to collapse our inline tag white space and remove redundant attributes. We can go ahead and remove empty attributes and script type attributes and style link attributes as well. Those aren't going to harm us. But what we don't want to do is just scratch that. I was going to go into an explanation for our HTML loader and how we had to fix that, but that's for another campfire story. So we'll just scratch that for now. Commons chunk plugin. This is the plugin that I was talking about. So this creates a third chunk. So even though it's not declared up here in our entry point, what it does is this commons chunk plugin will come up here to all of our entry points and it will say if there's anything that's in the vendors chunk and in the application chunk, we're going to pull it out of both. And what we're going to do is we're going to put it into a new chunk called common. So what that allows us to do is make sure that all of our chunks are kind of equal size and not have them where we have one huge application chunk and one small vendor chunk or so on and so forth. So what that means is that this common chunk is going to get loaded right at the start because it has common functionality that's pretty much across any two given other chunks. So it's pretty important to get loaded. We have this provide plugin. What this does is it resolves these, I should say, keywords, so that whenever we're writing our script, if we use the $, it's going to use the jQuery package, and if we use the word jQuery, it's going to use the jQuery package. So it's kind of like synonyms. So that way, if it can't resolve what a $, means, then this plugin will resolve it for you. And then finally, our clean Webpack plugin. What this does is it doesn't clean things up after we build, it cleans things up before we build, because we want to make sure that our www root has nothing in it so that there's no orphan files in there, because remember, our www root hosts content that actually gets served by the web server. So if you accidentally deploy a file in there and it's no longer used, it's still accessible somehow. So we want to clean that up before we deploy anything else in there. Alright, now probably the trickiest part to Webpack, our module. So some of this has changed. We don't use the loaders directly anymore. What we do now is it's called rules. I think this might have changed in Webpack version 3, and excuse me for a second. And what this does is it tests the file path of your dependencies. So whenever you come in here and it sees that you have a dependency right here, it will test this file path against a regular expression to determine, okay, what do I do when I load this? So by default, Webpack is only set up to load JavaScript files. Notice we don't have anything in here that says .js because it already knows how to bundle JavaScript files. What it doesn't know how to do is it doesn't know how to bundle TypeScript or HTML or CSS or SCSS, which is Sass files, or any of our fonts that we're using for Font Awesome. So we have to tell it how to do that. Now, a lot of people, they just include everything at once. Everything gets put into the big bundle and they call it a day. I like to keep my applications modular. I like to keep them very efficient and performant. So I have a couple different configurations based on what the type of file is. So for TypeScript files, what I do is I'm only looking in our application source for TypeScript files. I don't look in the node modules. And I use these loaders. And the funny thing about loaders in Webpack is that it actually loads them from the right to the left. So it will go through this loader first. So it will check against our Angular routes to see if it needs to get loaded, and then it will feed it into our Typescript loader, which does the TypeScript compiling into JavaScript. Our HTML, what it will do is we're looking in our application source for our HTML files. These are going to be our templates, not our index.html. Remember, our index.html is going to be at the root of our project. And it's going to use first this HTML Minify loader. So first thing it's going to do is it's going to minify it. And the options that we passed in here are, and you have to have these. You have to have quotes as true, because if you don't, then it's not going to keep quotes around some of your attributes, and it's going to break some of the Angular attributes that you have in there for its directives. Same thing with lowercase tags. What this does is it converts all your tags to lowercase. That way, if you have something like a *ngIf, where the I in the if is uppercase, it's going to be ngIf with the lowercase, and now Angular doesn't know what that tag means, and it's not going to pick it up. So you really need to use the lowercase tags false and the lowercase attributes false, so that it doesn't automatically lowercase everything of yours, and then either your components can't find each other or Angular can't find its own directives. After it gets done being minified, it's going to go through a file loader. What this does is it copies the file into our output directory using this path. So it's going to copy it to the root of the output directory, and it's going to use this naming convention. So it's going to keep the path name, the file name, and the extension of the file, but put .min in there and put it into our www root. Now the reason why we want to do file loader is because we don't want our HTML to get copied as string into our JavaScript files, because then our bundle for JavaScript files just keep growing and growing as we have more and more HTML templates. What we want to do is we want to host our HTML templates statically in our www root and have them called when we need them. Same for our CSS files and our Sass files. So we're going to load them through the Sass loader first. That's going to compile any Sass code into CSS code. Then we're going to load it through our CSS loader that understands CSS, and that's going to do our minifying. And then we're going to extract that and feed it into the file loader. So same thing with HTML. We're going to create a file for it. There's something weird about the CSS files for the file loader, where you can't have a slash here in the public path. If you put a slash here, it's going to break. It's not going to find the CSS file. I can't remember what the issue was. It took me a while to figure it out, but just trust me, keep this empty, and you'll be fine. This is for all of our Font Awesome. So Font Awesome has font face files, and we want to copy those over to the www root because our CSS files have URL codes in them that link to these. So we don't create our own fonts, so we're only going to be looking in the node modules for these. We're not going to be looking in our application source. And what we're going to do is we're just going to load this through our file loader. Now you notice everything I like to have is Pascal case, which is like camel case, but the first letter is capitalized. Here I'm kind of breaking that, and I'm saying that the folder I want to put it in the www root is lowercase f. The reason for that is because a lot of the Bootstrap and Font Awesome and stuff, they reference things in the lowercase f fonts folder, and I don't want to have to go change their source code, so I'll live with it. And there you have it. That's our complicated Webpack config. It's awesome. Trust me, this will be very helpful for you guys. It's very complicated, and you guys will probably have to go out and look at each individual piece and understand how it works. I hope I explained it well enough for you, but the goal is to not build one super bundle in Webpack, but to have many little bundles, and where it makes sense, have the files themselves minified and copied into the WW root for use when they're needed. So all of our content files, such as HTML, CSS, images, stuff like that, they get copied directly into the WW root and get referenced within our JavaScript file. Anything that is TypeScript or JavaScript will get bundled, but if it's used in multiple bundles, it's going to go in the common bundle. If it's not, then it's going to go in the application bundle. And I'll show you later how we're going to be bundling other things based on the Angular router loader, so that we can lazy load bundles, and bundles that are lazy loaded get their own bundle. So there's not going to be one big application bundle. There's going to be a small application bundle and several other bundles that we load. So I'll show you that later. Until then, next video, we start building the app. Thanks, guys.